of the Muslim Communities Council. Today we have a prominent scholar, Dr. Alfred Gutiérrez-Kavanagh. He's a professor of globalization trends in the Middle East from University of Comillas, Madrid, and a former professor of international relations and also professor of legal translations. It's a great pleasure to host your talk here on the platform of the World Muslim Communities Council. As everybody knows, you have been interacting with communities over there, and also you have intercultural experiences. So I hope you will be talking from your empirical experience, especially your experience building Sheikh Zayed Mosque and the cultural center in the famous cities of Madrid and Granada. Please.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Dr. Panakal, and for me it's a pleasure to be here today. Salam alaikum, shalom, may the peace be with all of you. In first place, I would like to express my gratitude to the World Muslim Communities Council and to its chairman, His Excellency Dr. Ali Al-Nuaimi, for the kind invitation to participate in this prestigious forum, and for their valuable contribution in encouraging the culture of coexistence and peace to face the challenges of the 21st century, particularly the corona pandemic, nationalities and ethnicities in this difficult phase of human history. It is therefore with great pleasure that I'm here today to present my experience and this paper on the Andalusian model of tolerance and coexistence. How can history shape the future? A model which I particularly firmly believe in, and which one experiences in Spain, like one also experiences in the UAE, because in both countries in the last 50 years, they have been welcoming people from different nationalities, from different ethnic backgrounds, from different religions and cultures. Regardless of the different attitudes that have existed since the 19th century between Spanish historians regarding the role of Al-Andalus in shaping the Spanish nation and its Weltanschauung, the objective fact remains that Spain, the Al-Andalus, had the longest presence of a Muslim rule in its territory, from 711 to 1492, compared to other European states. This process started, as you know, with the arrival of Tariq Ben Ziyad with a small group of Berber troops to Gibraltar. 1 year later, the combined efforts of Musa ibn Nusayr and Ibn Ziyad led to the total defeat of the Visigoth kingdom and the beginning of the Al-Andalus period in Spanish history, which reached its peak with the Caliphate of Cordova in 929, which was proclaimed by Abdul-Rahman III, until the Caliphate collapsed in the so-called period of the Fitna al-Andalus due to the strife between the descendants of the last Caliph, Hisham II, and the followers of his Chamberlain, Al-Hajib al-Mansur. As Pedro Chalmeta pointed out, the essential component of Al-Andalus is its people, Ahl al-Andalus, and not so much the geography. The fact that so many controversy has existed among Spanish historians regarding the definition and the influence in Spanish culture is not only due to its complexity, which arises from cultural, language, and religious syncretism, but also because I think that to understand Al-Andalus is a key issue to define the identity of Spain. For Claudio Sánchez Albornoz, one of the leading historians of the 20th century, Arab or Syrians in Spain, notwithstanding their male ancestry, were Spanish through their mothers and grandmothers, like the grandchildren of Sara Lagoda. This lady, from her marriage with Umair ben Said al-Lachmi, she had a son called Habib ben Umair, the common ancestor of the Banu Said, the Banu Hajjaj, and the Banu Maslama, according to Ibn Al-Gutiérrez, a reputed Arab historian and philologist, whose father was precisely the last Visigoth king in Spain, and his mother was Sarah, nicknamed the Goth, Sarah Al-Gutiérrez. So not only did Muslims acculturate, but the dominant Christian society itself had consciously or unconsciously assumed numerous Andalusian cultural uses. And such uses included also a number of rituals and cultures and traditions from the three cultures that contributed to the making of Al-Andalus. The territories formerly controlled by the Caliphate of Cordoba and subsequently by the Taifa kingdoms varied in extent as the Reconquista movement advanced on the basis of a coalition with different Christian kings and nobles. As may be seen in numerous examples, it was also a time of coexistence, ta'ayush, between Christians, Muslims, and Jews. This one can see, for example, in the conquest of the city of Toledo in 1085 by Alfonso VI of Castile. In Toledo, as we know, a major seat of learning, an institution called the School of Translators flourished. The relations between the three cultures have at times been simplified, but I would say that there has been from the very beginning a complex process and a very rich process of interaction between the people of the book. In addition, the uniqueness of the arrival of Islam in Spain had a fundamental influence on its historical development, leading to an Islamization of an important part of the Hispanic population with mixed marriages and a restored economic and social balance. Initially, the Mozarabs enjoyed from the beginning a privileged status as a protected community. As you know, the term Mozarab comes from mustarib, that is the term used to designate the Arabized Christians that lived in the territories of Dar al-Islam in Spain from the 8th to the 15th century. And they decided not to move to the territories of the north, where the Christian rulers were located, because they perceived that, unlike other areas, there was tolerance on the part of the Muslim rulers with regard to the Christians. The Mozarabs, to a great extent, adopted Arab language and culture while maintaining their own bishoprics, churches, and monasteries. They also translated the Bible into Arabic, which they used in their religious services. To this group, we can also add the Muladis, Muwaladin, people who did not have an Arab lineage, but had been brought up as Muslims due to marriages between Muslims and Christians or Jewish women. It must not be forgotten that in this period, the Jews who had been subject to persecution and to numerous coercions during the Visigothic monarchy were able to enjoy a greater tolerance as a community during the Muslim rule, as they were part of the Ahli al-Kitab, the people of the book. The great social cohesion of the Jewish community and the protection they received from the Muslim sovereigns allowed them to occupy numerous and important positions of responsibility at Umayyad court. Therefore, the Hispano-Jewish society also in the period of Al-Andalus presented unique features due to the interaction of these three cultures, and was perhaps one of the most dynamic models of the European Middle Ages. As noted by María Ángeles Gallego, women in the Iberian Peninsula were also protagonists as a consequence of, particularly also in Jewish families, something that did not happen in other areas, because, for example, a woman could become the heir of the family assets after the male members of the family had converted to Christianity. So what we find is a complex tissue in the Spanish Middle Ages based on true coexistence and assimilation by each of them of different traditions with numerous local particularities. It is true that these differences and this, I would say, heritage has at times been to a certain extent concealed in the official narrative of Spain. For example, from the 16th century to 19th century, many textual references to the Al-Andalus period were suppressed because they did not fit in well with the official version, which downplayed the role of the three cultures in the construction of Spanish identity. Just to give you an example of this, let's say, situation, two of the major historians of the 20th century who researched on this subject, Professor Américo Castro and Professor Sánchez Albornoz, reflect in their positions that there was like a division in the field of Islamic studies in Spain. We would say there are like two groups. In one of the groups was more aligned to the ideas of Américo Castro in his seminal work, Spain and its History, Christians, Moors, and Jews. And he considers that Islam, the arrival of Islam in Spain, forced to contemplate a new perspective to the traditional way of existing and to the social commitments of the inhabitants of the North. And he dismissed the exaggerated claims of the school of historians led by Professor Sánchez Albornoz that considered that Spanish identity had been fully forged before the arrival of Islam. This rather naive approach of being able to filter Spanish identity and try to eliminate certain like foreign particles in order to achieve like a degree of Spanishness exerted a major pressure on many researchers, particularly during the late 19th and throughout the 20th century. So I would say that there was an official history in which women, Mozárabs, Almudaján, Mudéjares, and the Moriscos, and the Jews, in summary, the so-called Spanish heterodox, were like placed or aside. However, unfortunately, in recent times, we find more balanced positions regarding the role of each of these communities in the shaping of Al-Andalus, who were not in any way perceived as heterodox by their contemporaries. The vast number of studies in the last decades regarding Al-Andalus from Spanish and international experts in different fields reveals that far from being something from the remote past, it still triggers fruitful debates due to the unique experiences that brought together the three cultures, Ahli al-Kitab, the people of the book. The term tolerance, as such, at times it is used in many different ways and can even have like a negative overtone, like when we say in English or in Spanish that you tolerate something, in the sense of like inequality. There's a dominant group which permits or tolerates that a weaker community conducts its activities or religious practices. I would say that throughout history, we have had four concepts of tolerance. Tolerance based on inequality, when the other cultural or religious practices are not allowed, or if they're allowed, they are under a subordinate relationship. Neutral tolerance, which is best exemplified in the Treaty of Augsburg in 1555, which ended the long period of religious wars between Catholics and Protestants. The European map was divided into areas of influence and each community remained segregated. Then we have a third concept of tolerance, which is tolerance based on a positive recognition of the other. This was proposed by philosopher John Locke in his Epistula de Tolerantia, the Epistle of Tolerance, and anticipates the ideas of the French Enlightenment. And then we have the fourth concept, participatory tolerance, in which individuals from different communities do not simply tolerate or respect each other, but cooperate and participate to discover themselves in the other, conceiving diversity as something positive that contributes to the richness of their country, their region, and their state. This, in my opinion, would be the concept of tolerance that was more prevalent during the Al-Andalus period. Although there were, of course, exceptions, particularly during the Almoravid and Almowahid dynasties. As pointed out by Professor Barcala Muñoz, the first university centers in Europe were the Islamic schools, the madrasa. During the 10th and 11th century, there's a clear contrast between the precarious European cultural level and the Islamic intellectual flourishing, particularly in the Iberian Peninsula. The most reputed Eastern scholars had been brought to Cordova by Abd al-Rahman III, and this would transform the the Andalusian Caliphate in an Islamic cultural center which irradiated knowledge to Europe. The madrasas of Córdoba and Granada acted in fact as higher education centers, which enjoyed a particular status of freedom and where the best teachings of science and philosophy could be acquired. Another important factor was the creation of different, apart from the madrasa that we have mentioned, there were also in the Christian kingdoms initiatives to translate texts in Arabic related to astronomy, to physics, to algebra, to philosophy, metaphysics, and other disciplines that were translated from Arabic into Latin and then copied, and they were the textbooks used in many major universities which still exist today, like Oxford, Cambridge, Sorbonne, Montpellier, or Salamanca, among others. As pointed out by Charles Burnet, when Alfonso VI of Castile captured Toledo in 1085, the city capitulated without bloodshed, and its inhabitants were allowed to stay and keep their possessions and their privileges. Alfonso VI declared himself the king of the two religions. The most significant element of the population at that time were the Mozarabs, as we have already mentioned. But if we take a look at the Toledo of the time, most of the population spoke both Arabic and the Romance dialect. But the vehicle for culture and religion was the Arabic language. I would also like to make a brief passing mention to the influence of Jewish scholars, not only as translators, but also they acted as cultural agents for Islamic science. Considering that the trade relations that existed between the different regions, the Jews acted de facto, in fact, as diplomats, proposing cultural projects. And they did this because they were fluent in Arabic language and they could offer the services to different kings, either at Muslim courts or at Christian courts. One example would be Abraham ibn Daud, who had fled from Córdoba and settled in Toledo in 1160, and he wrote books both in Arabic and in Hebrew on philosophy, astronomy, history of the Jews in Spain, and he was involved in the School of Translators of Toledo, which was sponsored by the Archbishop Rick of Toledo. In that institution, there were translations from major Arabic thinkers and philosophers like Al-Farabi, Al-Kindi, Zakaria ibn Razi, Ibn Sina, Al-Kharazmi, and many others. This project, referred to as the School of Translators of Toledo, was initiated by a priest from that city, Domingo Gonzalvo or Gundisalvo, who was active between 1130 and 1170 of the Christian era. Working together with this converted Jew that we have already mentioned, Ibn Dawood, mentioned as Aben Dehut in some of the chronicles. Many important books about Neoplatonism, Sufism, and mysticism were also available in the Iberia Peninsula, thanks to that effort. The translations of Arabic words into Latin were capital for the preservation of Muslim science, since many of the works of science and of philosophy written in the classical age of Islam are no longer available nowadays in Arabic version, but we do have the Latin translation. What is remarkable for me is the degree of enlightened cooperation between members of the three different religions, united by the love for science and the transmission of knowledge. If we have the project in the 9th and 10th century of Beit al-Hikmah in Baghdad, launched by the Abbasid Caliph Harun al-Rashid and his son, Caliph al-Mamun, which in that process, many works written in different languages, Greek, Syriac, Pahlavi, Sanskrit, were translated into Arabic. The project of the School of Translators of Toledo would be like the next step, in the sense that all the works, all the critical works translated into Arabic and revised by those scholars were then translated and made available to the West. And for many experts, and I agree, This movement of schools of translators allowed for the Renaissance of Europe and of the modern age. I would also like to highlight that the first translation of the Holy Quran into Latin was made in Spain by the English monk Robert of Ketton around the years 1142, 1143, probably with the help of a Mozart assistant. The version is not really a very faithful rendering of the original text in Arabic, and was later improved by one of the major translators of the School of Toledo called Mark of Toledo. This translation is very different from the one of Robert of Ketton. It was commissioned by the Archbishop of Toledo, a man of great knowledge, Rodrigo Jiménez de Rada. The execution or the project was executed in a way that was, I would say, a highlight in terms of philological work, because Mark of Toledo does not include his own personal comments or interpretations to the surah, and he made sure that the rendering from Arabic into Latin could be as accurate and consistent as possible to respect the spirit of the text. It was translated around the year 1210, and let's say that it was through the Iberian Peninsula that Europe became acquainted with the contents of the Holy Quran, because until then, most texts written about Islam were not based on original sources, but more based on reports, indirect testimonies from Christian monks and other travelers that had settled in the Middle East. As the French writer Ernest Renan wrote in 1852, the introduction of Arabic text in Western studies was the milestone from which the history of science and philosophy of the Middle Ages can be divided. Fernando Díaz-Esteban, in his contribution to the legacy of Al-Andalus, considers that also in contact with the Arabic Islamic world, the Jews of Al-Andalus recovered their interest in philosophy, in science, in history, and secular literature, which they already had in Hellenistic times and in the first centuries of Christianity. Then, due to the historical process and persecution, it was lost, and Al-Andalus recovered that spirit, and many Jews would write sometimes in Hebrew, but also in the Arabic language. So if we take a look also at the private life of the Jewish community in that period, we also find that Spanish Jews were quite different from Jews in other communities or in other areas. And private life, Jewish, although much controlled by Jewish law and traditions, also had the influence of Islamic patterns that existed in Muslim Spain, to the extent that, for example, unlike other areas, some Jews in Spain had several wives. If we now examine the initial period of the arrival of Islam in Spain at the beginning of the 8th century, we find that the social structure of Al-Andalus, and this is very much the same today in the 21st century, was made of many different groups. So at the time of founding of the Umayyad dynasty, we find that this dynamics of different social groups interacting and making contributions to that society was one of the bases or the underpinnings for the creation of Al-Andalus. We should also not disregard, as Pierre Guichard mentions in one of his seminal works, the presence or the factor that many, apart from troops that were of Arab origin, we had many more that came from North Africa. They were Berbers converted to Islam, and probably from 50 to 60,000 Berbers in the first waves crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and came into Spain. And let's say, although they had converted to Islam, they conserved or preserved many of their traditions and their customs. Just to give you one example, Abd al-Rahman I, who founded the Umayyad dynasty, would probably not have been able to access or to become, to consolidate, better said, his rule in Al-Andalus had it not been for the support of Berber tribes and clans, his own mother being from the Nafsa tribe. So I would say that the conquest also, or the interaction between the Islamic component and the existing peoples of Spain was gradual, and many pre-Islamic traditions and customs found their way into the Hispano-Islamic civilization, particularly through the process of mixed marriages with women from Visigoth noble families, who continued to have control of substantial parts of the Spanish territory. It's worth noting that, as Levi Provençal points out, the term Hispano-Muslim seems to have been forged around the middle of the 10th century, when such awareness of such identity exists. Although ethnically, says Levi Provençal, he may originate from North Africa or from the East, his character is different. The nature of this Al-Andalusian prototype, I do not want to discuss this matter on today in this paper, but I would say is important, very important in assessing the contribution of Islam to Spanish identity. I would say that this interaction and coexistence of Christians, Muslims, and Jews in many cities of Spain was an interaction, a real interaction, because they did not live isolated, segregated in different quarters, but as it has been said, they lived in enlightened coexistence. It is also interesting to examine the evolution of legal institutions in Al-Andalus, because they reveal a rich interaction, particularly in regions like Murcia, Toledo, Cordoba, and Seville, of the former legal Roman and Germanic systems with the new, let's say, with the Sharia, with the Islamic system. This is particularly interesting when one examines, for example, marriage contracts and the dowry system in Spain, in which, like, as one may see in the very interesting texts that have been preserved of fatwas from major scholars and legal practitioners, the marriage contract, the Islamic marriage contract in Spain, had certain specific elements which were not found in other areas. For example, we have the custom of sadaq, that is like a mandatory donation, not a dowry, which the husband provided towards the future wife. We have a term for that in Spanish from the Arabic word sadaq, called afidaque, was something very specific to the Al-Andalus systems of law. Therefore, as Pierre Guichard points out, it is not surprising, therefore, that Muslim Spain, with regard to the rest of the Muslim world in the medieval period, displays fully original features. In the second part of this paper, I would like to address the matter of how that model of tolerance and coexistence can shape the future. In order to do this, we need to examine what was the reason for the success of this model, considering that it lasted 8 centuries, from 711 to 1492, in which, as we know, is the time in which, following the marriage of Queen Isabella I of Castile and King Ferdinand II of Aragon, the nation state of Spain was officially or formally created. Until then, Spain was not a nation state. So for 8 centuries, the presence of Al-Andalus is a major episode in Spanish history. So what is the reason for the success of the Al-Andalus model? In my humble opinion, the reason for this success lies in its integrity. Perhaps it was the only moment in history in which the 3 cultures, the 3 religions of the book, had the opportunity to know about each other without prejudices, building bridges in order to create stable communities, considering that after the fall of the Roman Empire of the West, there was a void in Europe, a period of strife, a period of, I would say, of revolts, and the replacement of the Roman system by the Visigoth Empire did not effectively change, I would say, the traditions of many areas of the Iberian Peninsula, which were not effectively under the control. In the West, the history of Al-Andalus grew progressively, both from a geographical and cultural point of view, detached from the Islamic Caliphate of the East, which was at that time the Abbasid Caliphate. One should not forget that the founder of the Umayyad Caliphate of Emirate at the beginning of Cordoba, Abdul-Rahman I al-Dakhil, had miraculously survived the massacre of his entire family when the Umayyad Caliphate was replaced by the Abbasid Caliphate and the capital shifted from Damascus to Baghdad. And therefore, the construction of the Al-Andalus in a certain way entails a distance and even competition in the sense of a positive competition with the Abbasid state. But it had unique features as well due to the ethnical background of Al-Andalus, with Berbers, Visigoths, Slavs, Jewish communities, Christian communities. So there were a lot of I would say, there were a lot of elements in that social tissue which makes the coexistence that I use in Spanish, we call it convivencia of Al-Andalus, something that was, I would say, unique in that period of history. So the first pillar of Al-Andalus model, I would say, I'm going to mention three, is culture, thaqafa, without doubt. Had it not been, but that culture, that thaqafa, existed because there were respect and admiration between each of the different communities that comprised the social tissue of Al-Andalus. Therefore, it is also true that between the first stage of Islam in Spain, from the beginning 711 to the proclamation of the Caliphate of Cordoba in 929 by Abdul-Rahman III, there are considerable changes, of course, evolution, and let's say Cordoba in the 10th century, like Baghdad, was the capital, one of the cultural capitals of the world. And the Royal Library of Cordoba could boast of having 40,000 volumes, a treasure which could not be found anywhere else in Christian Europe. If we read the history of judges of Cordoba, of Ibn Harith al-Husani, we have interesting anecdotes about the passion for books of many of its citizens, and some volumes reached astronomical prices due to the competition between bibliophiles. The son of Abdul-Rahman III, Al-Hakam II, was also known for his passion of books and created a network of purchase of rare manuscripts from Persia, Constantinople, Kufa, El Cairo, Baghdad. And that immense library was an enduring legacy that led many scholars from different areas of Europe, basically Christians, to travel to Spain in search of knowledge. Just by way of example, his private secretary was a Christian girl of Christian origin, a lady called Lubna, who had been sold as a slave girl, and due to her talent in calligraphy, poetry, and mathematics, she rose to the highest rank in the court of Al-Hakam. So even the future Pope Sylvester II, who his name was Gerbert d'Aurillac, and the Pope that is between the end of the first millennium and the beginning of the second millennium, this is the beginning of the higher Middle Ages, had gone to Santa Maria de Ripoll in the area of Catalonia to become acquainted with Islamic texts that were kept in that monastery. And encouraged by the bishop, he traveled to Cordoba, encouraged by Count Borrell, in fact, who was the ruler of that region, to learn more about the sciences of astronomy and mathematics. So I would say that this element of coexistence, the fact that the three Abrahamic religions, the Abrahamic family in Al-Andalus managed to create an enduring experience of coexistence. And it was based, I would say, when I talk about culture, I talk also about the culture in the sense of knowledge, in a search of knowledge that led to a huge amount of interactions from a social point of view, from an economic point of view, from a point of view also of of architecture, of arts, and many other, I would say, fields of knowledge that were cultivated by the three communities. There are many other examples of fruitful interaction in Spain, and the intellectual efforts displayed by the translators and by the patrons, that enlightened patrons that sponsored these ideas. And I would just want to mention that interculturality is also even present, very much present, in Spanish architecture throughout the medieval ages, in monasteries like Santa María de Huelgas in Burgos, the palace complexes of Tordesillas, of Seville, in a style which we call mudéjar, from the Arabic term al-mudaja. Yeah, and let's say that this mudéjar art style, which we find in many buildings, is basically the merging of the East and the West in Spain, a mixture of styles of different cultures that have been tested in Al-Andalus, and its success story implied it was then exported to other areas, to Christian kingdoms. And for example, Al-Qasr al-Fajr, the palace of Alfajería in Zaragoza, is one of the outstanding examples of this mudéjar art. The second pillar that I want to mention is dialogue, hiwar. The quest of knowledge that was shared by three cultures was based, of course, also in the fact that after the Arabs defeated the Chinese armies in Talas, in Kyrgyzstan, paper, which was a secret kept by the Chinese, was then the secret of manufacturing of paper, led to to the creation of printing book, let's say, to paper mills, and to the possibility of having large, I would say, stock of quality papers to preserve knowledge. As Professor Maria Rosa Menocal mentions, God's universe in Al-Andalus had three principal and interlocking features which are at the heart of importance for us: ethnic pluralism, religious tolerance, and a variety of important forms of what we could call cultural manifestations, secularism, in the sense of like poetry or philosophy. And let's say that those three features created this long-term interrelation between the three cultures with dazzling results. In her book that she published in 2002, she titled it The Ornament of the World: How Muslims, Jews, and Christians Created a Culture of Tolerance in Spain. And the title, The Ornament, refers to the fact that Caliph Abd-al-Rahman III of Cordova was epitomized, was the manifestation of a golden age in terms of cultural and literary achievement. And following an official deputation from Abd-al-Rahman III that included the Jewish vizier Hasdai ibn Shaprut and a Mozarabic bishop, a German nun that was visiting called Roswitha wrote that Al-Andalus was the ornament of the world. It would be naive to consider that just coexistence did not have its ups and downs, but I would say that the Umayyad dynasty of Cordoba and the Al-Andalus as a global experience was based, I would say, on this culture of dialogue. One of the major mystics and philosophers of Islam, Ibn Arabi, born in Murcia in 1165, the author of the well-known work Futuhat al-Mekkiyah, among others, conveyed this feeling of coexistence of Al-Andalus, his native land, in a poem that has been cited many times. He says in this poem, my heart can take on any form: gazelles in a meadow, a cloister for monks, for the idols, sacred ground, the Kaaba for the certain pilgrim, the tables of the Torah, the scrolls of the Quran. I profess the religion of love. Wherever the caravan turns along the way, that is the belief, the faith that I keep. So this leads me to the third pillar. We had culture, we had dialogue, and the third pillar of Al-Andalus was love and tolerance and acceptance of the other. This is perhaps one of the most difficult things to achieve in the field of tolerance. Christians and Jews were not merely dhimmi in Al-Andalus. They were not simply tolerated. They were neighbors, they were friends, they were colleagues, they were skilled professionals, and they were accepted, but not only accepted, they were active participants of the multi-ethnical component of Al-Andalus, which was present from the very beginning. As Pope Francis stressed in the first celebration of the International Day of Human Fraternity, declared by the General Assembly of the United Nations, fraternity is the new border for humanity. It means respect and listening to the other with an open heart. Despite differences in cultures and traditions, we are all brothers and sisters, therefore we are part of the same family. And I would say that if one was able to travel to Al-Andalus of the time, and even if we travel to Andalusia, to Spain, I would say now as a nation state, one finds exactly this welcoming spirit and this quest, I would say, for fraternity. The signing of the Declaration on Human Fraternity, a landmark document, the text is called Declaration on Human Fraternity for World Peace and Living Together. It was signed in Abu Dhabi by Pope Francis and the great Imam of Al-Azhar, Dr. Ahmed El-Tayeb, on February the 4th, 2019, as you know, represents this historical moment in which, as the text says, we call on intellectuals, philosophers, religious figures, artists, media professionals, men and women of culture in every part of the world to rediscover the values of peace, of justice, of goodness, of beauty, of coexistence as anchors for salvation, and we have to promote them everywhere. This is the same call that, let's say, we can find in the creation of Al-Andalus. Al-Andalus called on the best, on all persons of good, let's say, of good heart that wanted to build a better society. In the encyclical letter of the Pope, Laudato Si, which was given in the year 2015, we already find also the concern of Pope Francis for the care of our common home. He phrases it in beautiful terms, which could also be applied to the model of coexistence, convivencia, in Al-Andalus. Nothing in this world is indifferent to us. I know I have like 3 minutes left, so I will not go beyond my allocated time. And I would say that in the making and preserving of the Al-Andalus model, everyone's talents and involvement was used. This is very important. We cannot construct, we cannot build a tolerant society if there is exclusion, if there is discrimination, if, for example, some individuals participate, but let's say they are not actively participating. They are, let's say, they are tolerated in this, as I explained at the beginning, in this sense of toleration, of to tolerate, just to let things like permit and consent. But we are talking about interactive toleration, of bringing forth the best of each community. Because I firmly believe, and I think that this is the spirit also of this landmark declaration and of all the efforts that are being displayed in many areas of the world right now regarding tolerance, that it is through culture, and cultural knowledge would be one of the pillars. It is through dialogue, which is the second pillar. And dialogue entails also coexistence. And then we have the third pillar, which is acceptance, and this is the most difficult one, and love for the other. It means going to the other. And this is something which also we find in the texts of many mystics and writers in the Al-Andalus period, like that, I mean, I travel to the other in order to know about him and to become enriched by his experience. So if we are able to, like, and let's say, fortunately, the Al-Andalus model provides so many examples throughout its 8 centuries that I would say it helps us, gives us insights, and as research progresses, we have like even more information about areas which at that previously were not so well known. We will have valuable insights to help us and to support us for the challenges arising from this new era. Thank you very much. Stay safe.
Thank you so much for your remarkable presentation. It was really a scholarly lecture on the Andalusian model of coexistence and tolerance. You presented, especially it's more than tolerance, love, affection, and living with the fraternity in a community. That's great, Thank you so much for that. And we have a few questions. I'd like to share you one. In your opinion, what are the main factors that made Andalusian model unique?
Um, as I explained, I would say that in the Middle Ages, let's say in the period that we talk, I'm talking of in centuries of the Christian era, between, let's say, the 5th century to the 15th century, generally in Europe, which many communities were persecuted. There was like a discrimination. I would say it was a time in which, generally speaking, coexistence was not easily found. So I would say that in Al-Andalus, there are, perhaps due to the geographical position of Spain as well, the Strait of Gibraltar divides Spain and Africa. This is about 12 kilometers. So let's say that Spain, from before Islam, before the Roman Empire, we had Phoenicians, we had also, before Phoenicians, we also had like the influences of Iberians, of Celts. Let's say this created a culture, a very unique culture, which is common to Mediterranean countries, of welcoming, of having an interest for the other, of having respect for the other. So I would say that when all these different factors, let's say the Christian communities that existed in Spain, the Jewish communities that had settled in Spain at the beginning of the 1st and 2nd century of the Christian era, and then we have the arrival of Islam, let's say that they had the Spanish territory, I would say, like a laboratory for a project which could not be probably launched anywhere else, which was a project which required that each of them, and this is tolerance, not only respects the other, but at times like relinquishes to impose his ideas or his views. And let's say by this mechanism of balance, of counterbalance, of integrating the three communities, there was true coexistence for eight, like in Al-Andalus, which had, I would say, its geographical extent varied over the centuries, but I would say for 8 centuries in many areas of Spain, this spirit of tolerance was, I would say, was something that was fundamental, I would say, for coexistence and for this unique cultural achievement.
Thank you. There's another question. Andalusia was a unique experience where Muslims, Jews, and Christians cooperating in building unrepeated human civilization. Why this model had not been repeated?
That is this is a very good question, actually. And I would say that perhaps because not everything is possible at any time in history. I would say that in part this is due to God's providence, that things that are possible in one moment, then as things or as the history evolves, become, I would say, the situation changes. And it is true that with the arrival of the modern age, let's say I'm using the expression of the historical expression of the 15th century, when like Europe considers that the Middle Ages have finished and we enter into the modern age, I would say that the cultural experience is very much diminished, and like the experience of power politics and of religion being used for political purposes prevailed. And I would say that this is perhaps one of the issues that we have to learn from Al-Andalus model, that when there's true tolerance, you don't impose your ideas. There's dialogue. And when that happens, you avoid extremism, because extremism occurs when like there's no space for dialogue. When, like, let's say groups use the force to impose the ideas. And I would say that that in Al-Andalus, the experience was exactly the opposite. Let's say there was admiration between the three cultures. When that admiration is lost due to political manipulation at times in Europe, which let's say, I would say, a clear case is, for example, the colonial movement and Orientalism. Let's say in Orientalism, there's not that culture of tolerance. Why? Because Orientalism means that the West looks at the East with a certain, I would say, approach. The approach that the West is superior, that it has something to offer and the East has to learn. In Al-Andalus, East meets West on equal terms, I would say.
Thank you so much. There's another question that more related to your experiences, that you do with the Sex Center and the mosque. Can the new model of tolerance, especially UAE, can rejuvenate the Andalusian one?
Yes, I think that I like to compare the I would say Spanish history with UAE history, because I would say in Spain, I mean UAE from, let's say, from its creation, due to the vision of the late Sheikh Zayed, has been a model for tolerance, and I would say of integrating people from almost 200 different nationalities. And in Spain, let's say, so we take the year 1971-72 as the moment in which this begins to happen in UAE. In Spain, let's say, in 1978, we changed from a system of exclusion. We had a dictatorship in Spain, in which, let's say, minorities were either non-existent or simply tolerated, but let's say kept apart, to the new democratic system of 1978 with the constitution, in which we have a different model, in which we encourage and we promote the dialogue, and let's say that the most representative religions in Spain, which are currently, apart from the Christianity, we have, of course, the Muslim religion, we have also the Jewish communities, and we have other religions, like particularly it's an agreement between the state and these three communities, and also with the evangelical communities in Spain. So I would say that by particularly engaging in dialogue with the different communities, also because Spain from 1980 to 2000 and to present day 2021, I would say the presence of Islam in Spain has increased a lot. We have almost more than 2 million Muslims in Spain. And so I would say when I travel to Granada and I meet with members of the Muslim community, I have been able to participate in many experiences in which, like, Christians and Muslims, particularly in Granada, I mean, they do not see themselves, or they do not define themselves as, because I'm a Christian, I'm a Muslim. I mean, we are neighbors, we are citizens, we share the same city, we share the same values, and like this, I would say, an interest in learning about the other, to such an extent that, for example, in Europe, I would say no university in Europe has so many foreign students, Muslims and non-Muslims, learning Arabic and different, I would say, and also culture, Islamic culture and history, like the University of Granada, which before the pandemic, we were talking about that before, there were almost 70 to 80,000 students arriving every year to learn about, let's say, to be part of that cultural experience of Al-Andalus. So imagine how this is beautiful. In 1492, let's say, Granada fell to the Christian kings, but only from a political sense. The spirit of Al-Andalus, still we find it in when you travel to Granada, in so many foreign students that go there. They could choose other cities, but they know that in Granada, still we have the heritage of Al-Andalus.
Thank you. Another question: how can young Muslims learn from Andalusia to build their own communities? Especially the world Muslim communities have different organizations, partners, from different countries, especially youths are cooperating with us, and this. So how this can help them?
Well, I would say that a key issue for I would say for this human fraternity project, for this integration of different communities, is precisely the participation of young Muslims, and of course of the young people from different communities, in knowing about each other. And therefore, I think that like many universities and many centers in Spain, and many cultural centers are, I would say, engaged in this effort. For example, the Foundation for Islamic Culture and Religious Tolerance, which is an initiative launched by Emirates and that we have in Spain, and which I have the honor to represent, is very much engaged in conferences, seminars, in holding talks, round tables throughout the year with not only, I would say, from a scholarly point of view, but like targeting all members of civil society, so that we let's say we have a fruitful dialogue between young Muslims, between, for example, young Christians, also with the Jewish communities, with evangelical communities, and so the bridge is there. I mean, which is very important. Let's say that people, students from abroad, or Spanish citizens, or anyone that lives in Spain and that wishes to engage in this effort of knowing about the other. I mean, apart from our initiative, but I would say it's very important that we create this bridge, and I would say that this is one of the roles of our foundation, which we are really happy to contribute to this. I would say to this project, which is a project which started, I would say, and is in 2017. And has continued until this day, and we are gaining more followers, which I would say each day and each month we find that there's a great interest in Spain in between the different communities to learn about the other. We also collaborate, I think this is the key, also with different universities, research centers, with different, I would say, civil society communities, so that we learn about the needs of each community, and we are able to provide, I would say, a better, I would say, avenue, a better highway to create this unity, this fraternity, which is based on, I would say, true coexistence.
Thank you so much for giving illustrious examples and pictures from the Andalusian past. I hope surely it will be enlightening the future of the world. Thank you so much spending this great time with us.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank again the World Muslims Community Council for extending this invitation. I would like to thank all the viewers that were here today with us. Thank you for the questions, and I hope that I have been able to shed some light on that matter. And thank you very much, Dr. Abbas Panakal, for your support and for promoting also this space of dialogue. So good evening and stay safe, and I wish you all the best.